Welcome to Begin, Build, Blossom, your business journey with Clarita, the podcast where we will discuss valuable insights, resources, and motivation to fuel your entrepreneurial spirit. Let's build a supportive community together. Subscribe now to Begin, Build, Blossom, and let's embark on your business journey. Let's pause for a moment to hear from our sponsors. You've built a name for yourself through hard work and dedication, but does managing the business side feel like a distraction from your true passion? Are you dealing with unmanaged finances? CME Accounting LLC is here to help. We specialize in organizing your financial records, allowing you to focus on what you do best. With organized books, you'll have more time for what inspires you, whether that's expanding your influence, building relationships, or simply enjoying life. Don't let unmanaged finances hold you back. Reach out to CME Accounting LLC today and let us help you thrive. Visit our website www.cmeaccountingllc.com or email us at admin@cmeaccountingllc.com. All right, let's jump back into our conversation. Good day. Welcome to another episode of our podcast, Begin, Build, Blossom, your business journey. Today we have with us Lillah Penddah. Lillah is a founder, a public speaker, and a podcast host. Her company, AFRO FACTS, creates educational tools played as games and workshops that assist people with increasing their awareness concerning Black history and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Her innovative use of educational games and workshops educates and fosters dialogue and understanding. These tools are crafted to not only educate, but to heal and unite, while also creating a safe space for individuals to explore historical context, engage in meaningful conversations, and develop personal awareness. Her podcast, The Conversation is the Relationship, sheds light on the minority experience and creates the safe space needed to acknowledge missteps, hear different perspectives, and learn through the lens of other people's experiences. Welcome, Lillah.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great. And I have listened and I continue to listen to your podcast. So I almost feel like I know you, although we have but it's wonderful to listen to you on the podcast. It really it brings to light a lot, and it makes me also reflect on some experiences that I've had in my life as well. So thanks for creating that space and for sharing all that knowledge.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. And actually, one more thing I remember about you is that you enjoy cake decorating.
Yes, I'm a hobby baker.
Yes. Well, I used to be until I had my daughter, so I haven't quite gone back into it.
It's a time consumer.
Oh, yes. And it's an expensive hobby as well.
It is not for the faint of heart.
That's for sure. Okay, so let's get into it. We will get started with a rapid fire section, and then we'll move into the 3 segments that we've highlighted in the name. Can you tell us 2 words that describes you? 1 that describes you now, and 1 you'd use to describe yourself as a child.
1 that describes me now is probably bold. To describe me as a child, uncertain, I would say.
Okay. Wow. Thank you. And we have covered that in the intro, but we will go through that again. So can you tell us the name of your business and what you do in business?
My company is called AFRO FACTS. So we create educational tools played as games that assist people with increasing their awareness with respect to diversity, equity, inclusion, and Black history. So really helping them get comfortable with uncomfortable conversations, because at the end of the day, we can't solve the problem if we choose not to talk about it. But also at the same time, creating the safe space needed to have fundamental mind shifts, to acknowledge missteps, and to really allow people that making mistakes is part of the process. And through making mistakes, there's opportunity to learn and do things differently going forward. So just helping people realize that we don't have to get defensive. We can be open to receiving the information, because at the end of the day, it is going to benefit us all.
Right. Well, thank you. And those discussions are definitely very difficult ones. So it's good to be able to introduce it that way. Thanks for doing that. And what were you doing before you started your business?
Oh gosh. Before I started the business, I was just developing the game because the way the game came to me was I finished university and I realized that throughout all of my educational career, I hadn't learned anything about Black history. And where I grew up, I was most often, if not nearly 100% of the time, the only Black person in the room. All of my friends are of other nationalities, predominantly white. I didn't grow up around Black people. So I decided to teach myself and my friends about Black history. So over a 10-year period, I was developing this game. Outside of that, I had like a standard job at a financial institution, and I was doing this on the side. But I would create a version of the game each year, facilitate it for my friends via having a party and really creating an event around it. And then I'd get their feedback and then see what I could do to raise the bar on myself for the following year as to what I could create.
Great, great. And are you currently full-time in your business?
I am not. I've got multiple jobs.
Oh, busy, huh?
So I'm also a public speaker. I still also have a day job, and then I also host a podcast as well, in addition to the business. But under the public speaking and the podcast fall under the umbrella of the business because they're really in furtherance of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, just approaching it from different directions.
Right, right. Okay. And in terms of the business itself, how many years have you been in business?
In business, in a formally structured fashion, about 3 years now. Yeah.
Okay. But in terms of the overall business, I think you mentioned 10 years. Is that?
So the development piece was a 10-year time frame of just really figuring out what is the best way to present this information. How do I get people to not only engage, but to resonate and internalize the information being presented if they themselves aren't Black and don't inherently have a connection to the information, but then also teaching myself and learning how to be able to help facilitate conversations when you're being met with resistance.
Right. Okay. And since you've been in business, can you tell us one of the highest highs that you've had in business?
Oh gosh. The highest highs have been the group of friends that I got to do what I would call market research with and the product development, because none of them look like me. So at the end of the day, it's easy for them to say, we don't need this. But instead, they created space for me to not only gently push Black history down their throats in a meaningful fashion, but to see them retain the information over the years, and then for them to go out into the world and learn new pieces of Black history and then be excited to come and tell me about it. That was really when I knew I was having an impact and the most joyful thing to see, because it means that they're thinking about it outside of the context of the game.
Right, right. And I could see there would be a domino effect.
Yes.
So the impact, it continues. They in turn will teach others.
That is the hope.
And then they will be more comfortable having those discussions as well.
That's absolutely the hope.
That's great. And on the opposite side of that, what would you say is one of the lowest lows that you've experienced?
I would say seeing the world differently, because in order to be able to facilitate the game, to create the game, I've had to do a wealth of research on my own, and I'm acquiring all of this knowledge that I didn't previously have. This includes understanding what unconscious biases are, understanding what microaggressions are. And once you have that level of awareness, you absolutely look at the world through a new perspective. And so I was now seeing a lot of the behaviors that I would let kind of slide on by being presented to me in a new light, and now having the courage to speak up and call them out when they did occur. However, regardless of whether you're close with the person or not, it's always hard to be met with resistance or denial when you are telling someone that they have said something offensive, or they may not recognize that what they're saying or doing has an additional impact that they haven't considered. And so for me, the hardest part is when I have had close friends that I've been friends with for an extended period of time, react negatively in those moments. That is definitely the most challenging, because in those moments, that person is showing you who they are, and you have to believe them.
Yes. And you're also creating space. So I could see how somebody could probably not know that's who they are in some, like I think you learn about yourself through situations. So the fact that you both learning in that moment, but then there's still space allowed for them to reflect and maybe continue to have that discussion and maybe have a whole new perspective. I think that's amazing that you're doing that. Okay. And is there a book or movie that you'd recommend?
Certainly a bunch of books. I would highly recommend that people read White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. That was quite the eye-opener for me. Also, Emmanuel Acho's Uncomfortable Conversations. Those were some big ones because for me, it was really affirming. Because I wasn't around a lot of other Black people, I didn't really have as much opportunity to speak about when I was feeling, I could feel something wasn't right. There wasn't anyone to really turn to that would be able to understand what I was speaking about without having to like overtly explain everything. So these books really brought affirmation to the feelings I was having, those gut feelings where we know something's not right, but we don't necessarily have the vocabulary to say what it is. These books really pulled those through. So Robin DiAngelo herself is like a DEI coach and consultant. And then Emmanuel Acho is also a Black man. And so to get the Black perspective, but then also get a DEI coach who is not Black, but knows enough to be able to see what discrimination looks like. In her book, she actually has a list of the various microaggressions that are perpetrated towards people. And when I was reading this list, I'm like, oh my God, this is my life. And tons of people have said these things. That was a real eye opener because I was learning things I didn't know by way of, oh, I didn't know that was a microaggression. Oh, I didn't know there's unconscious bias here and how it develops. It really pulled back the curtain on what systemic racism is and how the system itself is built to perpetuate itself. And then how we are unwitting contributors to that. Because that's what we've been socialized to believe. We're not being presented with any alternative that would ever push us to the point of having to self-reflect. And these books, both of them do that. It puts you in a position to have to self-reflect and acknowledge the mistakes that we're making. Now, of course, nobody likes to be told that they're doing something wrong, or we don't like recognizing that we're doing something wrong. But on the other side of that discomfort, of that reality being presented, lies growth, because we can't change what we're not aware of. So when we have that increased awareness, we then have choice, the choice to either continue as we were or to do things going differently going forward.
Thank you. And I'm reflecting on that a little bit because I'm thinking from my perspective. I grew up in St. Lucia, the Caribbean. I was surrounded by people who look like me. But when I came to the US, there was quite a culture shock. I actually went to an HBCU. So I mean, it was still me coming from one place with people that look like me to another place with people that look like me, but it was very, very different. And then when I moved on to corporate America, where it was people who didn't look like me, it was another culture shock because I'm seeing things happening and I'm wondering, is this something I should be comfortable with or not? So there's learning even as someone who's part of the minority, in terms of like really recognizing what is happening, because sometimes you're left in shock and you're like, I don't know what's going on here.
Exactly. We get stuck in the shock because you're too busy going, oh my gosh, is it what I think it is? And we always err on the side of politeness because that's what we've been taught to do. And so there's a delay. As much as we want to be like, I see it, I react, and I tell them, there's a delay. I see it. And now I'm thinking, because it's like, is that what I thought it was? Oh my gosh, is it? It is. And then you have to decide. It's like, am I going to pick this battle today? Is this the hill I'm going to die on? Or am I going to let it slide? And in some cases, we choose to let it slide because what people don't recognize is when we're presented with those situations, those are trauma inducing. It's not just a happy-go-lucky, we're going to skim past it and everything's going to be fine. Whether we say something in the moment or not, we're still thinking about it after the fact. If we say something in the moment, we're then thinking about, oh my gosh, was I harsh? Was I too direct? If we were saying it to a friend or a family member or an acquaintance, it's like, are they mad at me? Are they going to stop talking to me? Are they going to be different towards me? And then if we choose not to say something, we end up beating ourselves up after. Oh, I should have done that. Why didn't I say something? Oh, I'm going to say something next time. So it's like no matter what direction we take, we end up internalizing it and it creates trauma. Now imagine being hit with that on a regular basis. That is what microaggressions are. They're small, little things that happen where we're making those decisions each and every time. And so people often call it death by 1,000 cuts. You might not feel the first 10 cuts, but then it's creating a wound. The wound never heals. The wound just gets bigger and it grows. And that is the trauma that comes with having to deal with discrimination and systemic racism on a regular frequency.
Yes, I agree for sure. It's not easy living the experience. So it's good that we have those spaces and we are having those conversations. I mean, a little at a time, it makes a difference. Okay, so let's move on to the begin segment. Do you remember the first time you actually thought about starting your own business?
I remember the game, my first thought about the game, because originally it wasn't going to be a business. I was going to make the game and then I was going to sell it to like Hasbro or something, and they were going to make the game. But I do remember first coming up with the idea because I started out with about 20 questions on a piece of paper and 3 friends. And I went to my friend's parents' house because we all still lived at home, and my friend sat directly across from me. And I thought I had picked easy questions because I had questions about Whitney Houston, Oprah, Prince, like the basic famous Black people. And the friends I was talking to were all white. So that didn't really click for me. I just assumed they would know because who doesn't know about Oprah? Who doesn't know about Whitney Houston or Prince? These are famous people. And within the first 10 minutes, it was going all the way left because they didn't know. And so I'm like, okay, this is not working. They're scared. I'm frustrated. Let me figure out a better way. And so I really had to sit and think about how can I methodically layer in the information so that people don't feel like it's a test, don't feel like I'm coming at them. But also I wanted to introduce fun. How do I make the learning experience fun? I don't want it to be like you're in a university classroom and someone's just talking at you. I wanted it to be engaging. And at the same time, I needed to create that safe space. And when anyone goes to play a game, you never hear them say, I don't want your fun. I don't want fun today. I don't want that. No, people hear the word fun or game and it's synonymous with fun. It instantly implies fun. So that's why I'm like, you know what, let me take the aspects of the games that I love and see what I can do with them. Maybe I can remix it, do something different. And that is exactly what I came up with. But I didn't get to the point that I'm at today. It was a definite learning journey because I would make a version, we would play it, and then I would see what's working, what's not working, what new questions do I want to add, how can I add in more information, what does the audience also think about it? So really, I was doing market research. I was just doing slow, methodical market research over time to really get the game to the best point that it could be.
And the game, is it something that you can get independently, or would it be through one of your workshops or webinars?
So at this time, we're actually currently working on creating a version that can be facilitated without my presence. Because right now I facilitate the game. So I get hired by organizations, companies, groups to come and facilitate for various events. But I definitely want people to be able to access it on their own, particularly teachers, because I see it as being an amazing in-school tool that supports teachers in teaching Black history, in teaching the concepts and the tenets of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Because at the end of the day, imagine if we had this information earlier on in life. Imagine the kinds of people we would be with that level of awareness. We are the people we are now because we didn't have that. So a lot of the problems we see in the world are a result of not having that information. And yes, we're acquiring it now, but if the minds of tomorrow had that information today, imagine what tomorrow would look like. And so that's really been the crux of it. So we're working on creating a version where people can just access it on their own. Teachers are able to utilize it in the classroom. But right now, it's through me facilitating.
Okay. And I'm thinking of the young you said, because I noted that during elementary to high school, you said you were one of the few Black persons in your school. And that had me thinking, because right now I'm actually looking into independent school for my 4-year-old. And it's something I want her to have the best education. And I think the resources available through those schools are probably some of the best you will get. But at the same time, one of my hesitation is that what is she being exposed to? What kind of experience she's going to have? And I'm operating from a point of view where I grew up in the Caribbean. That's all I knew. So I want to give this a chance. But then when I think about it some more, there is that part of it that you highlight from your upbringing. So is there anything you can say to that, especially someone trying to make that decision now for a young Black girl?
I think what's important is considering the demographics of the school. What does that student makeup look like? Is it a predominantly white school? Is it a predominantly another ethnicity school? Are there other Black kids at that school? And then also community. If you're not going to get it at school, are they on sports teams that have other Black kids? Are they engaged in any other community activities where there's other Black kids? Maybe they have a big enough family that they've got cousins around them all the time, so they're around other Black people. I think it's incredibly important to ensure that they get to see people that look like them on a regular basis. So it's not a novelty when it occurs, because that's what it was for me. And what that did was not being around people that look like me really pushed me further into assimilation and really just figuring out how to fit in and not wanting to stand out. But at the same time, it made me less confident in the way I looked. I was too busy trying to look a way of another ethnic group that is not me and that I really technically cannot look like. So, but I was working hard to assimilate into that because I didn't know any different. And what this became was it really impacted my sense of self, my confidence, and also my perception of my own appearance at the same time. I have struggled to find acceptance with my hair because nobody around me had the hair that I did. I couldn't even talk to anybody about it. I didn't know how to take care of it. Like there was just a whole piece missing. And it wasn't until in adult age that I find appreciation for my hair, for my looks, for my Blackness. Now, if I had other Black kids around me, I would have felt less of an anomaly in the sea of white in which I was swimming. So I think that definitely has to be considered. But at the same time, the level of representation that we're seeing on television, in social media, in literature, that didn't exist for me. And so they are able to get some of that at the same time. Also, kids today are just way more open than the ones I were, because we didn't have any of the vocabulary that we had now. Like no one was talking about microaggressions. No one was talking about unconscious bias. People were barely talking about racism. Now it's much more of a common conversation. So that inherently puts things in a better place, but it hasn't solved the problem entirely. And especially when you're in those young formative years, it's so important to be able to see others that look like you, because kids don't notice the difference until they start going to school. And then they're made to notice the difference. That's the thing. I find that with my friends' kids all the time. They will have a moment where they see my color for the first time. And it's most often once they've started going to school. Otherwise, they just see me as Auntie Lillah. I am no different. I'm just me. But once they start seeing going to school, then they're hearing different conversations. They're also being exposed to what other kids are learning in their own homes as well, which is something we cannot control. The only thing we can control is the level of confidence that we're able to instill in our own child. And that also comes through being able to see kids that look like you, so you know that you're not the only one. As they say, power in numbers. Knowing that you have someone else that looks like you is so impactful, and that'll lend itself to their ability and confidence to speak up when something is not right.
Let's pause for a moment to hear from our sponsors. You've built a name for yourself through hard work and dedication, but does managing the business side feel like a distraction from your true passion? Are you dealing with unmanaged finances? CME Accounting LLC is here to help. We specialize in organizing your financial records, allowing you to focus on what you do best. With organized books, you'll have more time for what inspires you. Whether that's expanding your influence, building relationships, or simply enjoying life. Don't let unmanaged finances hold you back. Reach out to CME Accounting LLC today and let us help you thrive. Visit our website www.cmeaccountingllc.com or email us at admin@cmeaccountingllc.com. All right, let's jump back into our conversation. Okay. And I can see how your game, like if teachers have access to that, they can really change the environment and really expose the kids to all the kids, of course, to blackness and just being able to better relate to people. So I'm really glad that you have that. And I really hope it gets into the schools soon.
We're working on it.
All right. And so I know you said you had 10 years of actually working on the game and then 3 years of actually formalizing the business. Can you just walk us through some of the steps you took to get from working on the game itself and now having the business?
Yeah. So after the 10 years, I actually took a 7-year break because it had become overwhelming. I was really creating an experience for my own friend group. And then I was slowly starting to be hired. But then at the same time, I was still the only Black person in the group. And so what people don't realize is when you're being hit with all of that information coming at you. So I'm learning like all about Black history in one kind of go. And I'm having to adjust, process, really internalize all of that information on my own. That's a lot because it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And it's hard to not get upset about what people have had to go through in the past and what people are experiencing in the future and why the system is the way it is. So that was a lot to receive. And I think also because I turned it into an annual party. So it wasn't just playing a game. I was creating a study guide. I'd give it to my friends at the beginning of the month. Then I would spend the whole month planning a party that we would play the game at. I would be getting prizes. I would have a theme for the game. The prizes would be part of the theme. My mom or I would cook a traditional African meal. So my friends were really being immersed in an experience, which I was very happy to do. And that really is what led to the popularity of it. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for one individual to be doing. And so I had a little bit of burnout. And so I took 7 years off, and it was 2020 that brought me back, the Black Lives Matter movement, because now I wasn't the only voice in the room. Now a bunch of people were saying what I had been saying on my own, standing by myself. And so that really evidenced that not only was there still a need for this education, but there was so much more going on that I didn't know about. And there was so much more going on that the whole world had chosen to ignore. Because it wasn't like the instances were new. It's just because of COVID, as luck would have it, the world quieted down. And the voices that had been screaming from the mountaintops all of these years, now we were hearing them in a different way. So that really brought new vigor and new just motivation to the table for me. And within that, it brought the realization that I had no business structure. I had a product, but I had no business structure. And so in Edmonton here, we have an organization called Edmonton Unlimited, and they provide free entrepreneurship programs to support entrepreneurs no matter where they are at in their journey. And so I caught wind of that because I was looking for, how do I create business structure? I don't even know what to do. How do I take this to the next level? And they literally fell out of the sky on my head at the exact right time. And so I took all of their programs that they offered because I couldn't believe it was free. And I was getting the support that I needed in creating business structure, in going back to the drawing board and doing more market research, because I created it at a time when the world was different. And now, stepping into an age of social media, I had to really kind of take a look at what were people seeking now, what were not even the new problems, but what was being brought to light through these voices, and then how was the world reacting to it. I had to adjust and accommodate, and I also wanted to make sure that my game was pushing people. I didn't want it to just be about the fun. I wanted it to be about pushing people in a loving way, like a grandmother would, because she knows you can do better. And so that allowed me to create some new categories, new question categories in the game that put people on the spot, but again, in the comfort and the context of a game atmosphere. But through Edmonton Unlimited, I was able to really figure out what I needed to do, what my next steps were to create the business structure that I needed.
And what were some of those next steps?
Some of those next steps were really getting clear on my customer base, understanding what each of my customer bases were looking for, what they were doing now to solve the problem of lack of awareness. What were their barriers to stepping into uncomfortable conversations? Why were people running away from being told you made a mistake? If I was making a mistake and I was unintentionally hurting my friend, I would want to know so I could stop making the mistake. Some people don't want to know. Some people don't want to know. And so it really became understanding that mindset, really getting into the minds of my potential customers to understand their motivations, their fears, and the barriers that they were putting in place for them. Once I was able to understand that, I could then take a look at my product and adjust accordingly to make sure that it was meeting the needs of my customer base so that I would have a market for the game. Thereafter, it was about, how do I scale up? How do I take this to a point where I don't have to be present each and every time so that more people are able to play the game? How do I create it in such a way that it supports teachers? I also wanted to expand my study guide because that was an amazing piece of feedback that I got from my friends. They're like, you know what, we need some help. They were the ones that presented me with the idea of the study guide, and it's become one of the most liked pieces of the game. And so just really deciding where I wanted to take it, and most importantly, making the decision to focus on Canadian Black history, because a lot of the Black history we're presented with is American-based, whereas we've had so much happen in our own backyard, but we weren't being taught it in schools. So again, it was more research, understanding what the product was, what I wanted it to be, and how I was going to get there. But then also the scale up, the manpower, talking to the right people. Entrepreneurship is a networking game. So I needed to get out there and make sure that people knew who I was, knew what I was trying to do, and then seek support, see what gems would come out of the connections I was making. And then, of course, you have the standard things: open a business account, register the business, do your business taxes, things like that.
And when you mentioned networking, and I know you were the TEDx speaker.
Yes.
So I could imagine what that was like for you, in terms of people who got to know you, and you also getting to know people who are interested in what you're doing. So would you mind telling us a little bit more about that experience?
Oh my gosh, that was something that was on the vision board in my mind, and just a really great opportunity because I love public speaking. I always have since I was a kid. It's a random skill that I started to cultivate for myself. And so through those connections, through the work I was doing, they reached out to me. I didn't even seek it out. They came to me. And it was such an opportunity to speak at a level that I had never had before and deliver what I believe to be poignant information about the power of education, the power of not just learning about Black history, but other minority histories, and then the impact that it would have on the audience at the end of the day, the participants within the game, and what they weren't getting by being denied those opportunities to learn. It was really something else to just be able to speak at that level, at a level where it's so recognized worldwide. People are able to absolutely go check it out on YouTube just by searching my name and TEDx. And then also just the process of it all, cultivating a speech that really spoke to me, practicing. I have a very particular method when I come to delivering speeches. I love memorization. It becomes a whole mental exercise, but it allows me to deliver it with the tone, the connotation, the inflection that I want. And that's something I absolutely utilize in any of my speaking because I want to be able to take the listener on a journey. It's not just about me talking at you. It's really about me conveying the emotions behind the words that I'm saying so that people are able to really connect. Whether you're Black or not, you're going to be able to connect with what I'm saying and feel the experience through the words that I say.
Great. And congratulations. I had an opportunity to listen and it really did speak to me. So thanks so much for doing that. And going back to the business, what is the story behind the name of the business?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I originally called it Black Facts because it was facts about Black history. And I had an opportunity to work with we have an organization here called the Africa Center. And it's one of the largest organizations in North America that does a lot of work in the African descendant space, various programs. And I was presenting my game there, and I got a piece of feedback. And they presented something really interesting that I would never have gotten from, because again, not around a ton of Black people. This is when I was starting to gain a little more access to Black people on a regular frequency. And so I was being presented with some perspectives that I had never even heard of before, never even considered. And the individual asked me about the name, and they're like, have you ever considered changing it? I'm like, what do you mean? This is my baby. 10 years of this name and I being married. But they raised some good points. They're like, there's a bit of a movement to get away from the use of the word Black. And I'm like, well, I don't even understand. But then the more I thought about it, it made sense, because really the word Black is a colonialized term, right? When you go to Africa or you go to the Caribbean, they don't inherently call each other Black, right? It's not something you ever hear until you go to North America, or you go to where it's predominantly white. All of a sudden, a color is applied to us. But when you're in Africa, no one is calling each other Black. That's not a thing.
Interestingly enough, too, my daughter, when I talk about our Blackness, when we have some conversation, she said, Mama, you're not Black, you're brown.
Exactly. It's not even an accurate assessment, right? I am a chocolatey brown, not Black. And so when you think about it on a deeper level, it's a colonialized term. And then who gets to decide the colors? Why are we Black? Why are white people white? Why are Asian people yellow and indigenous people red? Like, who is making these decisions? And then on top of that, think about what the color Black is often associated with. Night, evil, darkness, the devil, the black hole, right? There's a negative connotation with the use of the color, just inherently the way society has socialized us to understand it. So all of a sudden, you've got a random choice of color being applied to us. You've got a color that already carries a bunch of socially imposed meaning behind it. And now that's being applied to a group of people. Well, we're not evil. We're not the black hole. And, it puts us in deep comparison with white. What is the color white associated with? Heaven, angels, brightness, purity, all of that. And so once it was presented to me like that, I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. I mean, you don't even have to think about it that deeply. It makes a ton of sense. And so I'm like, okay, I am open to changing the name. And so this is a really big piece of entrepreneurship, because at that point I had the game for quite some time, and that is what it was known as. So to be able to be open to that level of feedback where I'm making a significant change to my business, that's huge. And I would say to any entrepreneur, this is where you have to really be open and take your ego and put it on the shelf. Because it would be easy for me to be like, what do you mean? How dare you suggest that? I'm never changing the name. But it made sense because it was something I had never had considered and had never been presented to me. And I don't know that it ever would have been presented to me had I not heard it from another Black person, because they are understanding it in a way that I want to connect with. This is what I'm here for. So if I'm going to get feedback, I need to be open to it. I still get to decide the value of it. And in this moment, I decided that that was valuable. So I really had to spend some time figuring out what the new name would be. I had a couple options. I tried it out on friends. You got to get feedback. I wanted to see if people could understand it. And so then I changed it to Afro Facts, which for me was more indicative of the fact that I'm talking about the history of people of African descent. And so it really allows for the diaspora to be included versus using a color to associate and then just perpetuating the meaning of that word at the same time. I even took it so far as to be like, okay, I'm going to see if I can take the word Black out of my study guide. That was far more challenging because it's also a really deeply ingrained word in our culture. So it's not like I can go around saying I'm never going to use the word Black. I still use it. I don't know that would ever change. It's too widely used, but I can make shifts where I can. And this is where I was able to make not just a shift within the title, but really a shift in the mindset for me. And at the same time, the game as a whole.
Okay, nice. And when you say when you reference black, I remember I one of the places I worked in Houston, Texas, I was referring to another black person in the organization and I said, "Yeah, the black guy." And this lady corrected me and she said, "You mean African American?" And I'm like, I don't know. I just thought we're black.
Right?
There was something about me just saying I'm black. But now that you just spoke about this, actually seeing it in a different way as well. It makes a lot of sense. And one of the things I want to ask you though, you mentioned that you were not aware of a lot of blackness, basically, like the history. You were not around a lot of black people. How do other black people receive that when you tell them that? Because it is the unusual story.
It's unusual, yeah, but I mean, it was the norm of my life. Then what's interesting is you don't realize you don't miss what you have never had. And so for me, I've never had it. But what would happen is on random occasions, I would be in situations where there were more black people around me. So for example, my friend and her boyfriend at the time, they surprised me one Christmas by taking me to a gospel concert. And I'd never been to anything. And we were sitting in a balcony just above the main floor. And I turned to my friend, she's Korean. And I'm like, look at all the hairstyles. Because everyone had different kinds of braids. And I'm like, oh my God, I've never seen this. Because like my hair was a huge insecurity for me because I had grown up with just being, it's different, it's different, it's different. Why is it this? Why is it that? Why doesn't it move in the wind like everybody else's? Not realizing that that is in and of itself beautiful. And so to be in a room filled with not just other black people, but other black people sporting these incredible hairstyles with their natural hair, I didn't even know what to do with myself. And I'm like, I can't even, and I was telling my friend, I asked her, I'm like, how do you feel being the visual minority in the room? And I'm like, do you feel any type of way? Like, do you feel different? She's like, no. And so I'm like, I felt different. I'm like, I don't even know what it is, but I feel different in this moment. I'm not sure. And I didn't even have words for it. I didn't know what it was, but it was a feeling. And so that was a feeling I didn't get to experience very often. And so I didn't know what I was missing. And because it wasn't frequent, it still didn't connect in a way to be like, oh, you're missing out on this. Now in adulthood, I can definitely see that I have missed out on a lot not having that, because that would have greatly impacted my confidence, particularly when it came to my hair, particularly when it came to standards of beauty. When I was growing up, whiteness was presented as like the number one, the only standard of beauty, to the point when my mom bought me a Barbie, it was a black Barbie. And I'm like, I don't want this one. This is not the one I want. And I'm like, now I'm just like, oh my God, like how terrible for that. I didn't want a doll that looked like me. I wanted the doll that looked like the white majority because that is what I was told was beautiful. So you're walking around thinking of yourself as less than. And so that is what I knew. Now I definitely seek out opportunities to be in those situations where I am around more Black people, because I've also noticed there's a slight code switch, which I wasn't aware of before. And not so much in the way that I speak, but definitely in the way I feel and maybe my mannerisms at the same time. Because you're having conversation in a different way on a different level with a Black person when they understand everything you're talking about and you don't have to explain it and then look at their blank face when they still don't understand. They get it. I don't have to say anything. All I have to say is hair and they understand the one word and they get it. Whereas I spent so many years having to explain my hair to my friends. Why do you keep it in braids? Why do you do this? How come you don't do that? And it's like, oh, can I touch it? Or they're already touching it already. Like all of those things, that's all microaggressive, but people don't know that. And I'm just like, you know what? I don't want to explain this. This is too much. So I got to a point where I stopped answering questions about my hair. Because I'm like, I don't want to have to do this every day. You've known me long enough to understand. And if you can't retain the information, that's on you. That's not on me. And so those kinds of things where there's like a decrease in stress because you know you don't have to explain every single thing. You know people have similar experiences and they just understand.
Nice. And in terms of environments, it brings me back to working in corporate America. And there was this thing about three Black people, and those three Black people meet up in the hallway. It's like, do we really want to be seen together? Because people have this perception, maybe we're planning something, or like there's just all this that happens in people's minds when they see Black people together. So listening to your experience and thinking of mine, it just makes me think of all those nuances, There's just a lot that goes on there.
Yes. And why shouldn't the people that have a similar background or a similar nationality not congregate together? They're doing that because that's comfortable. They're seeking comfort through that.
And it's very natural, but for some reason, it's not seen that way.
No, instead, society says, ooh, that's bad. But the question becomes, why does society think that?
Right.
What is the reason behind that? Do you have any proof that that's going to be bad? Or is that an unconscious bias?
What do we do about it? Because I've been in situations where people actually would rush so that doesn't happen. So they don't have to deal with that situation.
But we're perpetuating it.
Right.
We put space between ourselves, and then we're perpetuating the existence of the unconscious bias or the stereotype. We're helping it stay alive. So it becomes a battle on both sides. We all ultimately have to unlearn some of these social things that we've been taught and start to critically think about, why do I believe this? Why am I acting this way? And what proof do I have for whatever it is I believe or the actions I'm taking?
Right. And your game definitely helps with that. This concludes the first part of our conversation with Lillah Penddah. Thanks for joining us for part 1. We've covered so much already, but there's still more to explore. Tune in next week for part 2 of our conversation. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for listening to this episode of Begin, Build, Blossom, Your Business Journey, a CME Accounting LLC podcast. Please subscribe and be on the lookout for our next episode. If you'd like to share any feedback with us, please email us at podcast@cmeaccountingllc.com.